SJ. Welcome to Mvskoke Radio, your weekly source for tribal and community news, interesting guests and discussions, plus a local events calendar. SJ, Stone Go, Gary Fife, Jaho Jifkidos, Mvskoke Radio, Mabo Hedge, the Wedgekis. Welcome to our program here on this beautiful fall morning here in Okmulgee. We have a couple of things we'll be checking out today. We have Mr. Joe Williams from the, where's my note here? Sitting right in front of me, and I just drew a complete blank on his name. Joe Williams, thank you. He's legal counsel here for the tribe and works with our chief very closely on many issues. We're here to discuss the tribe situation and when it comes to medical marijuana. There's a way to go, a way you can't go, and things like that, and some general questions. He's not a scientist, I presume, and we can't get too far into the THC kind of thing. That's the stuff that makes you crazy. But we will talk about how the tribe is trying to deal with it and the formulas that are still developing. In the second segment of our show today, we'll be listening to an interview done by Angel Ellis with Ms. Swickhammer, who is a Mvskoke artisan who's been living overseas in Great Britain. So Ms. Schweckhofer, should be able to pronounce a German name. Anyway, Mr. Williams, thank you, sir. We appreciate you coming in today and taking time to discuss this complex subject.
Good morning, Gary. Thank you for having me.
Now, I remember in years ago when I was in college, we kind of laughingly talked about the days that marijuana will be legal and people could essentially just go buy it at a store or something like that. That is the case, but it's not the case in the sense that the drug that you get is not the kind that gets you high. It is a strain of the tetrahydrocannabinol, I believe it is, THC, a species of the plant that doesn't or has had that effect removed or bred out or whatever. So first of all, I guess from your own standpoint, what is the substance we're dealing with here?
Well, the medical marijuana that was legalized in the state of Oklahoma in 2018 essentially has regulations on the THC that you talked about, the contents of the plant that would be used for medical purposes. And under the state law, there is a regulatory structure for growing, transporting, harvesting, and actually all the way down to the user, the patients,
right,
and possibly caregivers for the patients on marijuana. And I'm not going to get into the details of how they break it down regulatory-wise, but I mean, yeah, it has to be used for medical purposes, and it has to be done pursuant to a doctor's prescription, and you get a license by the state in order to be able to use and possess marijuana for medical purposes. And so that was state law as of 2018. But it had no legal impact in the nation's, the Creek Nation's jurisdiction. There was no medical marijuana exception based on what the state law did.
All right, I'm going to put it in the most basic of terms.
Sure.
The state has adjusted and has made provisions for use of marijuana under certain circumstances. The federal government just says no, period. You can't deal with any of that. And so has the tribe really finalized what it's going to be doing with this substance? Is there a law in place now, or is it still in development?
So you raise a good point because, as I said, in 2018, Oklahoma state law changed regarding the use of marijuana. But at that time and currently, it's still a Schedule I controlled substance under federal law. That didn't change. And as you said, not just in Oklahoma, but in other states as well, there's been a lot of movement toward legalizing either for medical purposes or recreational purposes in other states. So policy-wise, the federal government has not taken an approach to strictly enforcing those marijuana laws, especially in those states where it's legalized in some form. So as far as Creek Nation, it wasn't until recently, with the council's approval last month of the medical marijuana exception in the criminal law, that we see a change at the tribal level.
Mm-hmm. So, I think confusion is still out there. I mean, you haven't had much chance to advertise the situation now. What is the status then for people who are curious? How could you explain it to them in a simple phrase?
Okay, well, very simply, under Creek Nation jurisdiction, people who have a medical marijuana license issued by the state, you will not be subject to criminal liability by the tribe if you are in possession of that license, whether you're a grower, transporter, patient, whatever license you have that's issued by the state, and as long as you are in compliance with state law for that license, then you're not subject to possible criminal action by Creek Nation.
Okay, now does this the amount of this substance have anything to do with whether or not you might be prosecuted? Someone obviously with a bale of grass in the trunk of their car is not the same as someone with a little bit of baggie and a few crushed leaves. Or how about even quotes paraphernalia unquote? If someone had like a pack of zigzags next to their Raleigh tobacco or things like that, does that fall into the same categories?
Okay, so let me back up real quick. You raised a good point. Prior to Creek Nation passing this law last month, it was a felony under tribal law for any amount of marijuana to be in possession by anyone. So there was no misdemeanor category. There was no determination of how many plants you have or how many bags you have, whether it was just flakes. It was any amount was a felony. So the medical marijuana law recognizes that under state license regulations, a patient has a right to have certain amount of marijuana in their possession as an individual, and a grower has certain regulatory requirements that they have on the amount that they may possess and in what form. We didn't go into at the tribal law. We didn't go into details as to how those regulations are played out and for each type of license holder. But if someone in the Creek Nation jurisdiction is pulled over by any officer or is approached by any officer and they have marijuana in their possession, if they have a license issued by the state, then as long as they have what the amount that they have in their possession is in compliance with state law, then they would still be okay. It wouldn't be unlawful. Now, if a patient has a patient license, but they have a trunk full of marijuana in their possession, then that goes beyond what they should have under the state license, and so they still could be subject to prosecution by Creek Nation because of that. They've exceeded what's the amount they should have.
Yeah, nobody's going to believe that you're going to medicate yourself with a bale of this stuff.
Right.
Now, I know this isn't really your field, but perhaps you can kind of give us an idea of what medical marijuana is used for.
Well, there are various purposes that a patient may go and request a medical marijuana license by a healthcare provider. Now, I don't believe in the state law there is a specific set of circumstances or situations that a person has to have in order to qualify. I believe the state law is a little bit broad and gives the medical provider a little discretion to determine if this patient has a medical need for medical marijuana. So if there are plenty of healthcare providers who see patients, and they just like any other situation where you prescribe medication, you come in with an ailment or a condition, the doctor sees you, diagnoses you, and determines that you have a situation where medication should be prescribed. And in this situation, if they think medical marijuana is one way to go, then they'll be prescribed that. But as far as I know, the state law doesn't set out specific types of ailments that you have to qualify.
Well, we've heard it often used or mentioned in relation to like pain relief or something like that, or getting someone's perhaps equilibrium set up, or corrected or whatever. These are the kind of things that they would be prescribed for usage.
That's my understanding.
Okay,
yes.
I know I kind of fumbled that question around a bit, but in other words, right now, a doctor can prescribe drugs that are far heavier than marijuana. I mean, Percocet or
right.
Any of the all of the oxys kind of things that are available now, and things like that. So, if you're looking for a buzz, you're not going to get it from this stuff, right? Or supposedly.
Well, I mean, I'm not a user. I don't have a license. I just know of the regulatory structure from a legal perspective. And as far as I understand, I mean, the marijuana and it can be in different forms, not just the kind that you smoke. I mean, there's edibles and everything,
good
and they have different THC content. And so that's also, if you go to a dispensary, I believe it kind of sets out different types of THC content, and depending on what kind of variation you want. So I guess it's like its strength. The strength of the actual marijuana that you can actually purchase. But no, I mean, it still has, as I understand it, there still is THC, in the product. It's regular marijuana, but you have to use it for medical purposes, and you have to have a license in order to do that.
Okay, yeah, because I'm not sure many people were quite clear on whether it was just going to deal with the pain and ignore everything else, or whether or not you'd better not be driving a car, I presume, right, while under the influence. Now, the procedure for obtaining a license, again, I presume this is not your field, but what's the procedure then for someone to obtain a license? They have to go to a doctor?
Yes, they have to have a medical prescription, and then I believe the doctor has a medication or has a prescription, and then the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority is a regulatory body under the Department of Health that regulates and licenses people. So for patients, they go to the doctor and get that prescription, and then they're able to get the license or approval to be able, and then they're in the system, and with the state system as being a licensed user.
So if someone went to a dispensary and was wanting to make a purchase, they would have to present this card. And does that card have any indication on the level of potency, perhaps, of a drug? Do you know?
It's a good question, Gary. I don't know the answer to that. I just know that there's a regulatory structure that they have, and I think the license, I believe I've seen some dispensaries that have a barcode, and so the barcode gets scanned, and they're in the system as to what they can use.
Right.
I believe that's how it's done at the dispensary level.
But we're not talking about somebody just popping in saying, "Here, let me buy an ounce of Acapulco Gold," or whatever it is.
Right. You gotta have that license. Right?
And you'll probably get busted if.
Right, and the dispensary may also lose its license if it sells to an unlicensed user too.
Now that brings up a whole new area. I'm kind of curious. Then it's got to be a really complex procedure then for someone to become a dispensary. Would that be the case?
I mean, there are background checks that the
Okay.
dispensary would have to go through in order to qualify for a license, and under state regulations, I mean, it's not like anyone who has a small or a minor criminal past might not be able to get a license, but obviously they're trying to keep out possible drug dealers or people who have maybe drug issues. It's no different than any other type of license that requires a background check. There are certain standards that you have to meet in order to qualify.
Now, the law that the tribe now adopted, I know we've probably hit on this before, but does that really match the state law? And I presume there's still some difference from the federal law because the feds say no, nothing, you can't have anything. So do the tribe and the state match up on this?
Well, right. So what the tribal law for medical marijuana does not affect or does not have anything to do with federal law.
Mm-hmm.
Marijuana is still a class 1 controlled substance under federal law. But at the tribal level, all the medical marijuana law does is say if you have a license issued by the state if you're in compliance with that license, then you will not be subject to criminal prosecution by Creek Nation.
Okay, yeah, that's the last thing the court needs is another flood of cases that comes in. Now, since the McGurk decision, we're hearing a lot of situations where someone may be arrested for a crime or as a perpetrator, perhaps, and under the McGurk decisions, they have to transfer into either the tribal or the federal court. Now, has the situation been worked out where the average officer in the field now has some guidelines to work with, be it Tulsa Police or even Lighthorse?
In regards to marijuana?
Yeah.
Right. So after the medical marijuana law was enacted by the council last month, I had a conversation with Lighthorse Chief Danny Wind, and he had already been communicating with officers throughout the reservation about the possible change in the law, because there were questions coming to Creek Nation about, we know that marijuana is illegal under tribal law. It's a felony. How do we handle situations in the reservation where you have an Indian who may be in possession of marijuana? Do we arrest? Is Creek Nation going to prosecute? So there were questions. There was some uncertainty about how things would proceed. But the Mvskoke Reservation Protection Commission that Chief Hill established in July as a result of McGirt had as one of its top issues this medical marijuana question. So the commission went to work to draft this legislation to make it clear that as far as tribal law, marijuana would not be illegal if it was used for medical purposes under a state-issued license. So, and after that law was enacted, Lighthorse Chief Wynn has sent this legislation out to all officers in the reservation to let them know that under tribal law, this is no longer an issue. You still, if a cross commission officer or a Lighthorse approaches someone who has marijuana and they ask for their license and their license is shown and the officer determines that they have the right amount in possession, then it's not even an issue. It's not even a question. We know under Creek Nation Reservation that that would not be an illegal substance.
But say a driver was sitting there kind of bleary-eyed and red eyes and going, "Hey, man," that might be a different situation. That would be then a driving while intoxicated kind of thing.
Right. So I mean, it's no different. Yeah. If you're using, but you have too much, or you're under the influence where you can't drive or operate machinery, or if you're a parent and you have children that you're watching, but you're obviously too intoxicated or under the influence, then you could still be subject to criminal violations. But those are other separate matters, separate laws.
Yeah. Okay. Here's another separate matter. We have hunting season, rifle season coming up. somebody's in possession and is carrying a firearm, is that going to present a new problem, or will there be prosecution?
Well, the medical marijuana law was enacted. It was drafted. That was pretty limited. It didn't go into all these scenarios about if you possess marijuana, but you're near children, or you go to a school, or your possession of firearms. It didn't go as far as identifying those specific situations, because those laws in those type of situations might change, and so. What we did draft is say that you can't be in violation of Oklahoma law for the medical marijuana license or any other law of the nation. And that broad language, any other law of the nation, we wanted to keep it open to say, hey, there may be other violations, that you might encounter, even though you have a valid license and you have the allowed amount of marijuana on you, you might be doing that and be violating some other law. Right. At the same time. So those, in that type of situation, you wouldn't be prosecuted for the marijuana possession, but you might be prosecuted for that other type of situation that you have going on at that time.
Well, if you got a high-powered rifle, you don't need to be messing around with any drugs.
Right.
Does this affect employees in any different way, or perhaps when they're on campus, and they have the card, driving tribal vehicles or anything like that? How does it deal with employee situations?
Well, that goes into what I was talking about. The American medical marijuana law did not specifically address that, but I know under Creek Nation's employee manual, there is this general prohibition against having drugs and alcohol, while you're on the job. But there is this understanding that sometimes people are prescribed medication, and that if they are prescribed medication, like Xanax or Oxycodone, whatever that they might have, but they're using it under a valid doctor's orders and prescription, that they might be able to have that and use that, but they still can't be under the influence while on the job. So it would be no different than having a medical marijuana license and prescription, and possessing that, but there's no blanket allowing the people to just smoke pot while on the job.
Okay, the tribal law has been in effect for how long now?
It was enacted October 31st.
Okay, it sounds like it's still pretty early, a matter of days actually. But have you had any feedback? Was there opposition to this idea? What happened there?
No. Well, thankfully, the National Council, we presented the legislation. We provided a memo supporting its reasoning, and the National Council unanimously approved the legislation, and there was no question from their end about why it was needed. And so that was great. Many thanks to the National Council for doing that, and Chief Hill for signing the bill soon after. But as far as questions from the public, the only thing that I've been hearing is that there's some people who are glad that now there's some certainty, and we're leveling the playing field for Indians and non-Indians in the reservation, because now everybody who has a medical marijuana card, whether Indian or non-Indian, will not be subject to criminal prosecution. It's just you still got to be in compliance with your license, but it's a positive thing, because there were questions. Even dispensary owners, they were questioning whether they might be subject to having their property confiscated if it was illegal. So for the dispensaries and the other business interests in the medical marijuana industry in the reservation, it creates a lot of opportunity for them and certainty, which is what you need in business.
Right now. Here's another uncertainty then. Is there a possibility of federal agents coming on to tribal lands, say pull into Glenpool and bust the guy who's got his shop there? Is that still a possibility?
There's nothing in federal law that would prohibit that. It's still, like I said, it's still on Schedule 1 as a controlled substance. So yes, And they could do that on all tribal land.
Yeah.
I mean, for any state that legalizes it, it's still illegal under federal law for them as well.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make any difference whether it's on tribal land or off tribal land until it becomes legal under federal law. It still technically is illegal under federal law, and federal agents technically could still enforce it. But there's mechanisms in place that really would make that very, very unlikely.
Okay, the Tulsa Police, Okmulgee Police, State Highway Patrol have all been working on cross-jurisdiction agreements. Does the subject of marijuana figure into this somehow? Those law enforcement agencies have the power, or they don't, or what happens there?
Well, for the cross-deputization agreements with other jurisdictions, whether that's highway patrol or city or county officers, all that means is that Creek Nation is authorizing those officers to enforce tribal law within the tribe's reservation under the terms of that agreement. But whenever this medical marijuana change under tribal law, then as far as enforcement, then as long as they are made aware, the highway patrol and other city and county officers who do have that authority to enforce tribal law, they should now know that this applies, this limited exception applies. And so neither Light Horse nor the highway patrol or those city or county officers would be arresting any person in possession of marijuana as long as they are in compliance with the law.
Okay. Now, this next question is based on rumor, so I don't know any basis there. But there was, the water cooler talk that those other law enforcement agencies were not going to enforce the laws or something related to that because of McGirt. That cross-deputization didn't mean anything. Saying, well, that's the tribe's problem. Let's let them go. Has any of that popped up into what you have to do?
Well, I mean, at first, after the McGirt ruling, and everyone started to hear about it, there was a lot of misinformation. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of misinformation. There was a lot of misunderstanding of how it applies. And so what the Reservation Protection Commission, one of the most important tasks is to try to educate and inform, not just the general public, but leadership at the state level, city, county level, and at the federal level. Chief Hill and his team have been meeting with members of Congress and having discussions with key people in D.C., trying at the national level, and then at the local level, meeting with Mayor Larrabee here in Okmulgee and other county officials to try to continue that education and informative outreach effort. But as far as law enforcement, I mean, there have been some issues of needing more information, from the nation and guidance. And I know Light Horse Chief Wynn has had a lot on his plate as far as being involved in that and working with those other officers from other jurisdictions and informing them of what they may or may not be able to do under the cross-deputization agreement and in the reservation in general. But we whenever we get these issues coming in, we try to deal with them as they come in, mm-hmm. and we try to anticipate problems that might come up. So it's a full-time job, but we're trying to keep our head above water.
So the issue is still kind of being developed and is in progress.
Right.
All right. Now, if someone wanted to kind of get an idea of what this whole situation is about, the topic, is there somewhere they can go to see a copy of the law and or any tribal actions for online? Did he make a phone number, perhaps?
Well, the Creek Nation Supreme Court website has a list of the entire code of laws, and this amendment is amending Title 14, which is the criminal code. So, yeah, I mean, anyone who wants to see what this law is and see what other laws of the nation are. I mean, it's all in the code. And if you go to the Creek Nation website, the main website, you can go to a link that takes you to the Supreme Court page. And on that Supreme Court page is Constitution and codes. And the codes will be there. And they do a good job about keeping that updated.
Well, if someone wanted to make a call and talk to someone, perhaps yourself or someone in your office, how do they get in touch with you?
Well, I'm available. My office is here in Okmulgee, and I'll leave my card with you. But I'm happy to talk with people about this. My office number is 918-752-0020. And I'm in private practice, but I do work, as you said, for Chief Hill as legal counsel, and as on the Mvskoke Reservation Protection Commission as an attorney advisor as well. So if I'm not able to answer it, I'm pretty sure I can direct people to other resources.
Okay. Well, gee, I still love hearing that word, reservation. All right. Well, Mr. Joe Williams, thank you so much. We appreciate you coming in and kind of explaining this very complex situation, and I'm sure we'll be keeping in touch with you, and perhaps we'll have a time to come back and chat on this one again.
Thanks for having me, Gary.
It's my pleasure. Okay, now we're going to take a short pause here, and then we'll be back with our Mvskoke artist who lives in England and is working on some interesting projects. So please stay with us here on Mvskoke Radio.
I started doing it when I was 11. I wanted to be just like my big brother. And some of my friends were already doing it. We got hooked fast. I just can't get enough. I'm Jacob, and I'm addicted to playing the drums.
There's lots of stuff that makes it cool to be native. Doing meth isn't one of them. Find something better to do. Check out ncai.org. A message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians. Who am I? Am I Indian? Just 'cause I'm a girl from the res, don't make things up about me. What if I move away? Then who am I? Some kids try meth just to escape. But then I think about my grandma, my little brother, my beadwork, my poetry, and I think, I like who I am. And I know meth is not for me.
Check out ncai.org, a message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians.
We will be sharing here a piece with an artist, I believe it's Melinda Sockhofer. She is a Creek citizen who has been living overseas and trying to maintain culture and spread some of her artwork. This was an interview done fairly recently with our reporter, Angel Ellis, and so we thank her for the piece, but we thought you might be interested in a point of view from across the pond.
I have a very special interview lined up today. We're going to be talking with Melinda Schwalkoffer about some of her art, some of her career, and just a lot of really interesting topics that I think are really timely in today's atmosphere of COVID and the different things going on in Indian country, and how we're going to really talk about how her art has been just this vessel for healing and a way to express all the things that many of us kind of feel and can get all tied down by it every day. So welcome, Melinda. Can you tell us who you are and where you're from, or where you're at right now? Because I'm pretty excited. This is our first kind of international interview.
Yes, well, I'm Melinda Schwalkoffer, and Meadow for inviting me to have a conversation with you about my artwork. I'm coming to you from a little town called Morton Hampstead in Dartmoor. It's in a national park called Dartmoor in a county called Devon in England, and we have a population of about 1,500. I'm originally from Southern California, and I moved to Great Britain about 22 years ago. I was in Scotland for several years and then moved down to Devon about 10 years ago.
And she's a Mvskoke Creek citizen, and so she's coming to us to really talk about her art. One of your pieces has recently won a pretty prestigious award here in Oklahoma, which is really kind of awesome. Given that we've had COVID and our art showings have been kind of delayed or canceled, can you kind of tell us about your Road to Oklahoma piece?
Yes, well, okay, Road to Oklahoma. I bought the fabric to make that quilt 4 years ago now, and I've had the idea in my head for a long time. It took me 9 months to make. I started making it in July 2019 and finished it this March. And I did enter it in the Trail of Tears art show. It was juried in, which I was very proud about. And the show, as you know, was originally due to go ahead in April, but because of COVID, it was postponed. And it went into an online show in July this year. And I'm just very proud that it won second place in its category. It was in the diverse category. And it's now at the Living Arts of Tulsa exhibition, Speak While You Can, which was curated by Roy Boney and Tony Tiger.
Awesome. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about the components of that piece that really, I've seen it online and looked in your gallery on your website, and it really just kind of has just a lot of different elements going on. And it's interesting because every time I think I've pulled the picture up, I've noticed something different.
Well, that's great because I do have a lot going on in a lot of my artwork, and I do have a video about it, which I'll ask you to share the link with people because it tells the whole story.
Yeah.
But it's quite a large quilt, and it's called Road to Oklahoma for two reasons. The Road to Oklahoma is an established quilt pattern that was done by settler women in the late 1800s. And the Road to Oklahoma, as you know, is the road that the 5 tribes were forced to walk to go to Indian Territory. So it's got kind of a double layered meaning. And when you look at the quilt, on the left-hand side of it, it's the traditional Road to Oklahoma pattern. I've got it, which way am I going? Behind me up here is the Road to Oklahoma star pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's on the sort of western or left-hand side of the quilt. And I kind of see it also as a map of the United States. And on the quilt, as you travel eastwards or to the right-hand side of it, I've got sun circles, which are on it. And that's the traditional Mississippian motifs. And inside of each of the squares and the sun circles, I've got maps or photographs or Dawes roll cards printed onto fabric, parts of speeches. I've got some words from Andrew Jackson, and I've got land for sale posters. I've got allotment maps. So every star in the quilt has something that's meaningful to the Mvskoke people, all of the 5 tribes really, but I really wanted this to be about the Creeks Road to Oklahoma. And it's also got a lot of my personal family history, which I've been on a journey on. And I say it took me 9 months to make the quilt, but it took me 20 years to make because grew up not knowing very much about our people or my dad's story. And I've been putting the pieces of the puzzle together for many years. And my artwork kind of helps coalesce all of it.
Yeah, and I think so many of us can really kind of identify with that, especially as some of us are from blended backgrounds where and then assimilation it really kind of was instructed to do that to the people. And so how has this kind of accumulation of information and then channeling it into art really like overall what's that done for you personally?
Well, it's really helped me find my identity as a Mvskoke person. And as you say, there's a blending. And I used to think of it as, I mean, a lot of people say part Indian, part Mvskoke, part whatever tribe we're from. But I sort of see myself as a confluence and where 2 rivers come together and having it inside of me. So it's really helped me learn about my identity, learn about my family story, learn about our tribal story. Mm-hmm. The quilt that I've got on this side is the first one that I made. And I made this one in 2000. I started making it in 2008, and it took me a couple of years to finish because a lot of this work's a bit emotionally hard. And I at that point I'd learned about the removals. I learned about the creek removals, which we all of the tribes had different stories and different ways things happen. And I was like, how am I going to talk about this? How am I going to make sense of it? And I thought I'll make a quilt. I'll make some artwork. And I wrote the haiku on it, which is, "The winter trees wept, a river of blood when we were torn from the land." And I was also kind of thinking about, it was not only us that left our homelands, But when we lived there, we looked after the land. We took care of it. We lived with it. We didn't own it and carve it up and profit from it. And I was thinking, what must it be like for the land that these people who had lived there for thousands of years and cared for it were no longer there? Um, Also at that time, I'd been living in Scotland, and I'd taken a few trips out to the Scottish Highlands, and the land there, the people there had been removed. And I mean, ironically, they were sent to North America, and some of them displaced some of the tribes on the East Coast and the eastern part. But I could feel this sadness in the land that the people that had lived there were gone when I was up in Scotland. And so I think when I put this quilt together, I was putting a lot of everything into it.
There's a lot of like spiritual kind of, elements to those concepts. And can you kind of give us a little bit of your background on how you really started, working with art and using it as those kind of healing elements? Because I've really kind of like read over, your bio, and you talk about that healing element through artwork. And where did that what was the genesis of that for you?
Okay, well, that's a really interesting question, Angel. I have always been a creative person my whole life. And in my 20s and early 30s, I was trying painting and pastels and different things, and nothing ever really hit the spot. I was living in Southern California at the time. And in 1996, I think it was, there was a quilt shop near my house that I used to drive past every day. Mm-hmm. And one day I went in, and when I came out, I bought a secondhand sewing machine, which I still have. And I signed up for a sampler bed quilt class. And so that kind of started me off. And I felt like when I started working with textiles and fabrics, that really was what I'd been looking for. And what I love about working with textiles and fabrics is it's textural, it's visual, it's sensuous, you can feel it. And if you make mistakes, you can just cut it up and splice in new bits of fabric. So it just worked for me on so many different levels. Mm-hmm. And then the sort of the healing part of it came. I've also, my academic background is in counseling psychology. I've got a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in counseling psych. And I just putting together mental well-being and artwork just made so much sense to me. I've never studied art therapy, but when I was living in Devon, when I moved down to Devon in 2006, I did a year-long foundation course called Art and Mental Health. And I really learned a lot about how artwork is so good for people's mental health and well-being. And I just, I've got a lot of artwork. I recently put my website together, and I was like, wow, I've done a lot over the past 25 or so years. But so many of the pieces I look at, I'm like, oh yeah, I was going through that in my life, and I made a quilt to make sense of it or to try to figure things out.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me that you've been so creative for so long, because that's really prevalent in going through your website. And I was blown away to find all this wonderful textile artwork. And then I'm like, oh, how awesome. She paints and does photography and everything. Can you kind of like talk us through like some of the different things that you've been into? Because I feel like it just kind of encompasses everything.
Yeah. Okay, so I found myself artistically with textiles, and I kind of focused on that for about probably 5 or 6 years. And then there came a point, I also got my first camera in about 2007. I'd never had a camera before. I used to borrow other people. So I got a camera, and I really found I love photography. And it's interesting because some people say, oh, photographers distance themselves from the world because you're looking at the camera. But I find that a camera kind of takes me into things, and it draws me into the world. So I find the opposite of the sort of stereotypical distanced camera person. Mm-hmm. And then I had some fun combining that with fabrics and learning how to print onto fabric. I stopped making textile work probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And it wasn't any conscious decision, but I started doing a drawing class. A woman who lives in my village taught a drawing class. So I started doing that with her. And I took up painting a little bit, went back to pastels. And the way that I look at it now, when I want to make something, it more often than it being a visual response to something, it comes from in here. or it might be a visual something that I see that comes inside, and I just know I need to make it into something and take it back out into the world. And sometimes it needs to be photography, sometimes it needs to be a painting or drawing, sometimes it needs to be textile. So I kind of ask my idea what it needs to be. And a lot of times I learn new techniques. I'm always learning a new technique with every piece that I make, so I can figure out how do I make that visual thing work.
So I really kind of wanted to ask next about some of your recent work that you kind of shared with us with your mask that has, traditional Muskogee language on it and things like that.
Okay.
What's like the most recent, I think there's one with some of the like even current topics like I can't breathe, the I can't breathe mask and
Yeah.
things like that.
Well, I'll show you. I can also send you photos of these if you want. But this is the one that I made. This one, I think it was in June when George Floyd was murdered, and I really had a strong reaction to that event. And the background of this mask that I made, it's from an engraving from 1780. It was an abolitionist movement, actually in Plymouth, not far from where I live. And it's the background of it is an engraving of a slave ship, and they just packed people in like literally like sardines. And
it's like an image I remember seeing in our history books as little kids when we were taught about like how they treated people and stuff.
Yeah.
So I noticed that, and I was like, that was something that just kind of jumped out in my mind.
Yeah, and then that phrase "I can't breathe," which George Floyd uttered as he was killed, and I'm sorry, I'm not so good with names, but there was another African American man who had said the same thing a few years ago. And I was just thinking about the slave ship and these people packed in, they couldn't breathe, and the brutality and slavery and the history of slavery that I think is still not acknowledged or addressed the way that it should be, and the brutality that still goes on today. So that was that mask. I have been part of a Facebook group called Breathe for Indigenous Makers Making Masks. And one of the first ones I made, I was like, oh, I don't bead, and I'm just going to do this because I have to. And this was the one I made for that. Excuse my pronunciation, but Eshte Mvskoke Oes, I am Mvskoke. And the background of this has the words printed onto fabric, part Indian, half-breed savage. And these are the words my dad heard used to label himself when he was a boy and young man growing up in Oklahoma. He was born in Muskogee in 1920, and a lot of racism. He felt very ashamed about being part Indian, and his Austrian American father never accepted him. So he brought that into our family. The other sort of Muskogee themed masks I made for Breathe, this is one called Hisakata, which is breath, life. And they're double-sided, and this is that really beautiful. It's kind of a wind or a whirlpool motif, Mississippian. I love this design, and a couple of others that I've got. The image that the two men facing each other on this one. Those are from a Caddo design, which was found carved into a whelk shell, and I have these two men facing each other, and then the breath. And it's called We Breathe Together. And this is painted on mulberry bark with some beads and kind of a natural fiber for the ties that go around the head. And then finally, I really love this one. This was a rattlesnake gorget that I found in one of the books that I've got. And I just made these two snakes mirroring each other.
Awesome. So what goes into getting these images onto the fabric? I'm kind of curious about this. I'm like looking at it, I'm like, I've never seen fabric like this. This must be part of the process.
Right. Well, some of it I printed onto fabric. On on this mask, I put fabric through the printer. On the one with the two rattlesnake gorgets, I drew it freehand with a pencil and got it right, and then I did it with a fabric pen. I really love Photoshop. I use Photoshop quite a lot to compose, and I'm really getting into printing on fabric.
So my daughter is an enormous fan of your turtles. She's a big turtle fan to begin with for anything, so she loves that painting. I'm really I think the first piece that I seen of yours on your website that really just kind of just gripped me, very steadfast and kind of really got my attention was the one with the red shoes. But can you tell me about that piece and its, history and how you've kind of learned and developed and dealt with personal things through that?
Yeah, okay, that piece is called My Grandmother's Shoes, and I made that for a show in Tahlequah. Is that Tahlequah? Is that the right pronunciation?
Tahlequah?
Tahlequah, that's it, Tahlequah.
Yeah.
It was called Breaking the Silence, MMIW, Me Too. And I started with a map for that one, and I found this map of, it was before Oklahoma, before statehood, and Indian Territory was still Indian Territory, but on this map, there were all these all these colors on the western side of the state, and it was done by a geological survey. So they were looking at all of the ore and all the minerals they could find. So they're already starting to look at this land and what's there that we can get our hands on. And I was also very aware of missing and murdered Indigenous women. I had learned a lot about the man camps and the extractive industries and the link with violence against Native American women. Mm-hmm. And so this piece is called My Grandmother's Shoes. I've written a poem. I'm not sure if I do have the poem on it. And so on this map, I'd also, when I was doing some research online, I found these satin shoes with rhinestone heels. And they were originally from a department store in Houston in the 1920s. And they were like something really fancy that a flapper would wear to a dance or something. And I just put all of these elements together. And this is a very personal part of the story because my grandmother, my dad's mother, died when he was quite young. He was 8 years old when she died. She was 16 years old when she had my father. And my grandfather, Ted Schwackhoffer, he was also 16. My dad got his father's name, obviously, but I don't think they were married. I think he was able to have the name on the birth certificate. I'm not quite sure. But I know they never lived together as husband and wife. They never parented my father together. And I don't really know very much about my grandmother's early death. My dad really didn't talk about her very much. But I wrote this poem, and I'll read it to you. Born in Indian Territory, her land was pulled out from under her. Her moccasins were taken away from her at Indian school. Rootless, ungrounded, barefoot, she walked down dusty roads, looking for home. New roads ran between boom towns and oil fields, slicing through stolen land and carving out Oklahoma. Boomer, sooner. There were too many men with too much get-rich-quick oil money and too much time on their hands. A pretty barefoot Mvskoke girl, she found a pair of cast-off red satin shoes at the side of the road. Cracked and cheap, too small, they pinched her feet, but made her feel like a honky-tonk queen. Men in fast black Buicks stopped and offered her a ride to nowhere. Once she got on that ride, she could not get off. She was spirited away.
So this is so powerful to me because I think this is a trend that is still very prevalent in our communities. When we see it in the headlines all the time, women who are, indigenous, just kind of trying to get by, and then things happen to them, and it's like, they're expendable and no one really cares or looks for them. So how has that helped you kind of make kind of peace with, your family history, but then also deal with these current kind of, events that still take place?
I think just, again, putting all of those together, and it was a very emotional piece to make. A lot of my pieces are very personal and very emotional. And I feel, I cry, or I feel sad, or I feel angry when I make a lot of my work. And it's just sort of a vessel to put a lot of these feelings in, and a visual place to put a lot of things together. And it was bought by somebody in Tahlequah, and it obviously touched somebody else. And you're saying that it touched you. And that's it healed me to make it. It gave a place for me to put a story, not just what is a personal story to me, but a collective story for a lot of Native women and who've had ancestors who had been done wrong by. But the other people are seeing it and responding to it. That's part of the healing of it. And when I first started showing work, and I was like, oh, this might be a little bit too personal. Maybe I shouldn't share this. Maybe it's so personal to me, no one's going to connect to it. But kind of the paradox is, the more personal I think any artist makes their work, it really touches people's hearts and souls, and that's the most powerful. And it's just having the courage to put yourself into it. And it's like, I don't want to pussyfoot around, and I don't want to waste my time making stuff if I'm not going to put my heart and soul and my guts into it. And people respond to it, and that's the payoff for me. That's why I do it.
Well, I love that you're out here doing this work, and I kind of understand that too personal thing. I write just for my personal kind of, thing, but I also write for the newspaper. Those are very different, types of things. And I always think of the personal stuff as, oh, that's just mine. I'm just going to throw that in the box. That was just kind of my therapy a little bit. But I love that you're putting your work out there, because I feel like if one or two other people see it, understand it, process it, and it raises the awareness, then it's elevating this to the consciousness of the rest of the world. And I'm very proud of you for all that work that you're doing. I kind of wanted to ask you a question about your involvement or work that you're doing with the Plymouth. Can you tell me about that project and what it is and how you are involved?
Oh, sorry. Is that the community artwork that?
The Mayflower.
Yes. Yeah, that's very interesting. And after I started to clue you into what I'm up to, I've got a question for you.
Okay.
So Plymouth is about an hour away from where I live, and that's where the Mayflower sailed from 400 years ago. And they were planning all these big hurrah pilgrims celebrations and commemorations. And because of COVID, the numbers aren't over. They thought a lot of Americans, nothing against Americans, but they thought a lot of white Americans were going to come that are really celebrating this, and it's all had to be very subdued. I was approached by 3 artists, British artists, about, I'd say 5 or 6 months ago, and they have a huge sculpture that spells out the words "No New Worlds," and it's facing Plymouth, and they have sort of asked if I could be involved in it, and I'm still kind of feeling my way into it. And actually, after I'm done speaking with you, Angel, we've got a Zoom call with Survival International. They've got a campaign called Mayflowers Kill, and it's very hard hitting, and they talk about genocide and disease and the ripple effects of colonization that are still being felt today all across Indian country. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, is the Mvskoke Creek Nation, or are people, is it on their radar or not? Because it's like an East Coast thing, or?
I haven't heard anything about this, and I'm kind of fascinated by it, and I would like to learn more. And it almost seems like something that like cultural preservation might like to weigh in on or lend advice to, or at least maybe connect with or be aware of in some way, because that's an enormous conversation in Indigenous communities right now. Especially, there seems to be an increase of people who are kind of decolonizing thought processes, and we're kind of seeing this emergence of young people going out and relearning history without the colonial, influence. So it should definitely be a timely and, important kind of concept that people should be, getting at least an ear to the ground on, for sure. But I'm not sure if they are, but I definitely want to like help facilitate connecting anybody that might want to be connected.
Well, that would be wonderful, because they've asked me to be connected, and I wasn't quite sure how. And yeah, so let's continue this conversation.
Awesome. So you have the like privilege of being the native person nearby that they can kind of latch onto, and
Well, I know it's a very mixed thing because I think what we're all learning in this process, and I've got a very good friend, Dr. Stephanie Pratt, who's she's Dakota, and she lives about an hour from me. She's Dakota and Anglo American, and she lives over here, and she's been the go-to Indigenous person in Britain for a very long time. She's an art historian and an independent scholar and a really brilliant woman. And we're like, well, we don't want to be the token people, and
Yeah.
we want to do it the right way and have it be a collaboration
Oh,
from
sure.
the ground up, and so it's a real learning process for all of us, actually. Yeah.
I'm kind of like really proud that we have so many Muskogee people all over the world. You know, like when I think about like the spatial kind of element for me, I'm seeing it from how many places our newspaper goes, and it's a lot, and it's kind of exciting for me to think that there's seeds of the Muskogee Nation all over the world. So
Yeah,
that's kind of fun. Well, I thank you so much for giving us your time today and talking about your art. And I want to congratulate you on your accomplishments. And I will try to like connect you with email with some folks who might be able to steer in the right direction on Mayflower topics and things like that. And I'll definitely keep sharing information and stay in touch. And I'm going to be a big fan from here on out for sure, because I just loved kind of exploring the work you did. Any final thoughts to leave anybody with?
Oh, just stay safe and keep being Muskogee.
All right.
Angel Ellis of the Muskogee News reporting staff, and Melinda Schwackhofer, who is a Muskogee artist who has been living overseas. We'd like to extend our thanks to Mr. Jared Moore for supplying us with that audio material. Thank you, sir. We sure appreciate it. Okay, that's it for me. We'll catch you next week on Muskogee Radio. Widow Mabo Hedges. You've been listening to Mvskoke Radio. Join us again next week for more local, tribal, and community news and updates. Mido.